Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
You have to run to stay in front. Welcome to another episode
of Unfiltered, only on Past the Wire TV.
Dan Oman here with some exciting news. DRF Formulator, the gold standard in past performance information, is now free exclusively on DRF Bets. Join DRF Bets with the promo code WINNING. Get a $250 first deposit match bonus, a $10 free bet, and free Formulator already uploaded to your account. Access Formulator's premium features, including sortable trainer stats, race replays, personalized trip notes, and lots more. Free Formulator exclusively on DRF Bets.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered on Past the Wire TV. We've got a little bit of a Saratoga preview show here. My co-host, Michael Wilson, our guest, attorney Bill Gotimer, longtime Saratoga frequenter, racetracker, and I think this is a preview going to be a little different than what people might expect. I don't think we're going to be talking any handicapping today or opening day card, except that I think it's mediocre. You guys can weigh in on that. But there are a couple of issues starting off this meet that I think warrant some discussion. And I think that's where we'll go. So with that, how are both of you gentlemen?
Very well, thank you.
Okay, and Bill, you're already up there. You're living up there now. Michael's going up for the meet. I'm staying in hot, sunny Florida this meet, but I'll be watching all the action on TV as usual. What's your take on this meet, Bill? Going in, there are a couple of issues I know that you're aware of. One is, and it was a surprise to me, the opening day card. You've got two horses in, trained by Juan Vazquez. Juan Vazquez, to my understanding, has some pending serious issues involving animal cruelty. His license is, I would say, not in good standing, but yet he's on the program for two horses that Ricardo Santana is scheduled to ride on the opening day card. Any thoughts on that?
Well, you know, there's a long history of suspensions and appeals and requiring that people have due process in order to have their living taken away from them, or their ability to take a living away from them. I think this is probably a little bit different. And let me say from the outset, I don't know Juan Vazquez, and I'm not really familiar with him or anyone around him. But what I am aware of is that a regulatory body in a neighboring state, namely Pennsylvania, has determined that he's been guilty of cruelty to animals, and in a game and a sport that's based on animals and based on horses. It's hard to think of a more damning determination than that, right? So I mean, you know, we're used to seeing suspensions for drug overdoses and performance enhancing drugs and paperwork violations, and even in some cases labor law violations, but really cruelty to animals, you know, strikes directly at the heart of the game. And I think everyone is looking for someone else to take the step to not participate and to shun, at least temporarily, someone who's been found to have been cruel to animals. And there's a number of players here, and there's the New York Racing Association, there's the New York State Gaming Commission, and there's participants in the game. And I think all are saying, if the other one is okay with it, I guess so are we. But it does rub me the wrong way, to say the least, that everyone's acting as if it's business as usual in the face of a determination that there's been cruelty cruel practices used on animals in his care.
And I believe they resulted in death.
Yeah, I believe I'm not 100% familiar with what Pennsylvania said on that. I know there's a death in New York that's being investigated or is purported to being investigated. But there's an actual determination of cruelty, and it's hard to find a more damning determination when you're a licensed trainer in care of animals who give their best for our entertainment.
What I found, and I don't know that ironic is the right word, but what I found just curious or strange about it is, this occurs a couple of weeks or days, I don't know the time frame of Naira making a very public statement about how the Bob Baffert ban by the 3-member committee of a year less the time served was all about the integrity of the sport and the protection of animals and bettors, and the game itself. And just a couple of days or weeks later, you've got a guy, like you said, that's been deemed to have been cruel to animals, specifically racehorses, allowed to enter horses and presumably race horses on opening day of one of the most prestigious race meets in the world, let alone the country. It doesn't sit right. It doesn't sit right. And I was always under the impression, and I don't know the legalities of it, and I don't know the impact that the recent ruling on Bob Baffert about due process and having a hearing, how it would impact this. And you might know, Bill, but it's always been my understanding, and I do know people that I will not mention, but I know people over the years at NYRA that have been, quote, banned and denied access as undesirables, not given any due process, just basically told at the door, no, thank you, you are not welcome here. And there was no recourse for them whatsoever, or at least none that they decided to take or publicly take. So it was always my understanding that, if they really want to keep you off the grounds and not allow you to race, they can do it. Maybe that's not correct. I don't know. But I would think that there is a way they could prevent him from entering horses.
Well, I mean, if you look at it, I think in the spring they said that they didn't grant him stalls at NYRA, which would be your first step, right? Get him off the grounds of your grounds. But, now you're still letting him enter horses. And I've seen entries denied for numerous reasons. But I think the interesting issue here is, so there's already been a revoking of his license in one state. So and Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if with that happening, and they said in the article that it's more difficult to revoke a license than to just not give him a license once he goes for renewal. But my thought process would be, if you're already revoked in one state, couldn't the New York State Gaming Commission say, hey, look, Pennsylvania's already said he's not allowed and revoked his trainer's license? Because I know when I do my trainer's test, every time I've applied for a trainer's license, and granted, he does have his license in New York, it asks, do you have anything in another state that would hinder you in this state? And it's on every single trainer's license that you apply for, even if you're just doing reciprocity, if I ship a horse to Maryland to run from New York and I have to apply for a Maryland license for the day, I still have to be able to say there's nothing on my record that would prevent me from being in good standing in your state. So for somebody who's been shown to have numerous violations at multiple different jurisdictions, the question is, why do you keep granting people like these licenses when it's clear when you're filling out a trainer's license that they really don't want you to have anything pending on your license somewhere else? So I don't know I'm not a legal guy. I just know the rules and regs when I trained horses and licenses of that nature. But Bill, maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Well, without getting too much into the weeds, and it's a little different everywhere, but for the most part, you're right, Michael, that you're deemed to have a property interest in a license once you have it. Once you have a license, having something taken away from you, you have a property interest in it, and you're owed due process, which is an opportunity to be heard, which is an opportunity to confront your accusers and all the things that go with that. So you're right. It's far easier to initially deny a license than it is to revoke one. That being said, and there's generally reciprocity, meaning that if you're suspended in one place, you're suspended in all places. And that would, a revocation of a license in one jurisdiction would be a reason to begin revocation proceedings in another jurisdiction. So you're right on a lot of those. We're a little bit in the dark because it hasn't been stated, and maybe it's happened, but I haven't seen it published, that this suspension has been appealed and that he's been granted a stay during the appeal process. I don't know enough about Pennsylvania law, so I'm a little bit out of my area here. So that may or may not be the case. But what you have right here is you have three categories of people who are participating, and with this trainer being on the running horses and being in care of horses, in the face of this determination, at least by the Pennsylvania authorities. And you have three categories, right? You have people who are doing it voluntarily, people who may be doing it under duress, and people who have the power to stop it. And depending on what you think, to me, they all bear some responsibility, right? So the people who are purposely participating with him, certainly the owners, I don't know who they are, but somebody owns racehorses and they've entrusted their care to a person who's had a determination that he's been cruel to animals. That's I guess that put that question to someone. My guess is the answer would be either disbelief that the charges or the determination is correct, or loyalty. Loyalty goes a long way with people. We see in every endeavor, people stand by people even in the face of horrible allegations. So there's a loyalty factor there. Ricardo Santana, who everything I know about Ricardo Santana is he's a nice young man. He's incredibly talented and gifted. I don't see what's in it for him to ride two horses on opening day in Saratoga for a trainer who's been determined to be cruel to animals. I don't see it. I don't see why they're voluntarily putting themselves in that position. And maybe no one will call them out on that, but he's got a very well-known and very successful and very well-respected agent in Matt Musiker. I don't know why they would purposely put their name on this. The New York Racing Association is probably in the category of reluctant participant, right? As we said, they've banned him from the grounds. They went to the mat on the Bob Baffert matter, and one of the reasons in legal circles where you don't go to the mat is because if you're stuck with the determination you don't like, you're stuck with it not only for that case, but for other cases. And the New York Racing Association went to the mat on the Bob Baffert matter, and Bob Baffert went to the mat with them. And they've come up with a rather cumbersome process in order to deny someone entries or the right of refusal that the New York Racing Association has. So I guess they're in the reluctant category. I'm sure if you asked them, they'd be happy if he had not entered those horses, and they'd be happy if he scratched. But the third one, the one that has the power and there's really no explanation as to why they're not acting, is the New York State Gaming Commission. The New York State Gaming Commission, and again, without getting into the weeds, they certainly have the power to step in on an emergency basis, and they may even be determined at some later date to have done it improperly. But there's no question that if the New York State Gaming Commission had an emergency revocation or suspension of his license and denied entries, that New York Racing Association would comply. I mean, we saw that with Todd Pletcher's entry in the stakes race over the weekend, where the state stewards required that he be scratched, certainly probably over New York Racing Association's objections. So, you know, in those categories, you have people who are willfully participating, people who are electively participating, and people who are not acting with the power that they have. And the upshot of that whole combination is that everyone's acting as business as usual. And I guess when they go to the post, you know, the public handicappers will talk about whether the horse has a chance, and the bettors will either root for or against him as if it was business as usual. And that, to me, that's only in face of the fact that it's a cruelty to animal charge is it really unacceptable. So that's a long-winded answer. Sorry.
So I guess the next thing is, would there be a shot, which I know stewards can do, right? Because I think the ruling was on July 7th. The question is, when were entries at Saratoga, right? So when did we actually take entries for opening day? And was the ruling done before entries were taken? And then my question is, there could still potentially be the opportunity that stewards do scratch them on the day.
That's a possibility. I was actually thinking that might happen. And we'll see. We'll find out.
I think the suspension begins on the 17th, if I'm not correct. If I'm not wrong, rather. So I guess that's probably a built-in period in Pennsylvania where you have an ability to appeal or ability to get your affairs in order. So I think that was part of the reason. But you're right. I mean, race day scratches are not unheard of.
Bill, from a legal perspective, could the fact that the suspension or revocation doesn't start until the 17th kind of hinder the Gaming Commission or NYRA from taking any action prior to that date?
Well, I'm sure NYRA feels it. I'm sure NYRA feels that it's handcuffing them, so to speak.
Okay.
I think one of the answers as to why did you take the entry? The entry was made by someone with a intact license from New York State to enter horses. Therefore, we have no reason to reject it, and I understand that. And you know, I guess that's, again, if there are emergency powers that New York State Gaming Commission has, you would think they would use them in an instance where someone has been adjudicated in a neighboring state to have been cruel to animals.
I agree with that, and I do think that given the state that our sport is in, and all the punches that it has taken lately, and you know, all the efforts that we on the surface make to talk about things like transparency, like integrity, like animal welfare, and you know, putting the horses first. When you have something like this happen on an opening day for you know, a boutique, prestigious, well followed meet, it's just a really bad look, and just bad timing, and something that the industry really doesn't need. And it goes back to, in my opinion, you know, something that I've spoken about for a long time, and you know, I don't know that HISA is the answer, but there needs to be a centralized regulatory type body for all racing jurisdictions in North America, or at least within the United States. Canada, I guess, could have their own, but within the United States, we've got to have one central governing body, one set of rules enforced across the board, with the action and the power to actually police the sport and protect things like this from happening. You know, I remember at the Breeders' Cup a couple of years ago, and we were reeling from blows then. And we had a horse breakdown in a classic. You know, the last thing that we needed. Imagine if something happens with one of these Vazquez horses. You know, it's the last thing that we need, and just a bad look. And you know, I mean, maybe I'm a little extreme about it, but it dampens the whole meet for me to see the name of a trainer who's, you know, got an animal cruelty issue on an opening day card at a meet that I love. and cherish, and that we all wait for, and that a meet that really, when you get down to it, Saratoga, what is it about? It's not really about the betting. It's not really about the town. It's about the celebration of racing and racehorses. To me, anyway, the greatest horses in the world and greatest races in the world have taken place over that racetrack. And something like this on opening day kind of dampens it for me.
I mean, I would agree. A lot of it, and I think it's interesting talking about some of the rules because I've had to run through all the regulations and medication stuff that is at least in the works, and then there's more stuff that's going to be rolled out. So it's interesting seeing how hard a line they're actually taking on some of the things. So I do think it's really going to clean up a lot of this stuff, make a little bit more clear cut in a lot of regards. But again, if there's any issue with these horses, hopefully they're scratched morning of by a state vet if there's anything deemed wrong with them. And then the state steward could always step in and scratch them because of what's going on. But, there has to be more in our game to where we can be a little bit quicker acting on things. You see it in every other sport. And maybe it's the fact that, each state regulates our sport. Now we're going to have federal oversight. But if a NBA player punched the fan, NBA takes action immediately. They don't wait. It's just done. And then, and Bill, maybe it's under the radar and I don't know, but I rarely see the NBA player go back and sue or appeal his suspension with the NBA, with the league, and maybe there's a way in racing we can make things a little bit more binding, that if somebody just says we're handing down a suspension, there's not this back and forth where people can remain in limbo with their due process. And let's state another name who's still running. It's also on the NYRA circuit, which is Linda Rice, who's been found to have, and there were a lot of people got in trouble who don't work at NYRA anymore because of what happened, and yet she's still running horses. And so there's got to be something a little bit more clear cut. And you'll see things where, okay, Dutrow is kicked out for 10 years and, Baffert, they're trying to change the ban on what's going on with him. But you've got things where there's actual evidence on certain people that shouldn't be participating. And look, some people have said, John, about you and I, that we're Baffert lovers. I worked for Baffert. I like Baffert. Are there things he's done wrong? Yes. Has he now served his suspension? I'm happy he did. If he kept adjudicating it and never got a suspension, it would have pissed me off. Because there's rules, and when you break the rules, you need to actually serve the sentence that you're handed down. So same thing, give these guys what they deserve, let them serve it, and give them another chance at a certain stage. I'm not saying that same thing with Juan Vazquez or a Linda Rice, but the fact that these people can keep going on as they're doing business as usual, I think there needs to be quicker action on a lot of.
Well, Linda's case, I think, is a little different because Linda's violation was, all we know, was administrative in nature. She was gaining access to Encompass and paying people for that and basing entries on that and allegedly gaining an advantage over that. But she's appealing that and going through that, legally defined appeal process, which allows her to race until that finally is adjudicated. And if she's using that to her advantage or delaying that or has some political help in that being delayed, I mean, that's unfortunate, but part of that process. And if she's taking advantage of that for as long as she can, I think it's a little different than the animal cruelty situation. I think that's an extreme situation that warrants extreme and immediate action, in my opinion.
Right, and John, I agree 100% about that. I have to be a little careful. I actually represented someone in the Linda Rice matter, but they're two different categories, and I guess I find the exigency and the urgency on this of someone. And it's just hard to have a more serious charge to me than cruelty to animals in this game. And when I'm all in favor of due process. I'm an attorney. I believe in it. Linda Rice may eventually be determined to have been wrongfully found in violation, and time will tell on that. But when I walk past protesters out in front of Saratoga, which I've done the last few years, I've always felt somewhat confident in the fact that I know trainers like Michael, I know trainers out there who give tremendous care to animals and give proper and humane and coddling treatment to animals at all levels. And I also feel confident that there are safeguards in place that if someone were to not be acting that way, that they'd be stopped. And I put the categories of all those other violations, Michael, that you speak of, the whole, the whole drug issue, the whole paperwork issue, all the stuff that people get suspended for. I put it in a different category, but I truly did believe up until now that if someone was found to be, and not rumors about it, but found by a legitimate authority to have engaged in cruelty to animals, that people would step in. And I guess I'm just looking for who that is. And I don't know whether it's the riders who would refuse to ride, or the bettors who will refuse to bet, or the racetracks who refuse to take the entry, or the people who are charged with regulating racing in New York State, the New York State Gaming Commission. But I fully thought that some one of those, or some combination of those, would act to say, not here, not now.
That surprises me that you think that. You have much more faith in humanity than I do.
Well, I guess if you don't think that, then you really have to question whether, the game is worth defending, I guess. I mean,
I fight that fight every day. Every day I fight that fight that you said is the game worth defending, and I believe it is, and I believe it could get better, and I believe we're trying to get in the right direction. But long way to go. And I always say you're only as strong as your weakest link, and as long as there is one person on any racetrack, okay, that partakes in animal cruelty and doesn't treat his horses the way that they deserve to be treated, it's a blemish on the entire industry. It's a blemish on everyone who's doing the right thing. That's a cold hard fact, whether people want to admit it or not. It's got to be a zero tolerance when it comes to things like animal cruelty and abusing horses, not taking care of horses, abandoning horses, sending horses to slaughter, all stuff that happens way too often in our industry, despite the progress that we make. Let me ask you this question, both of you. Michael, I know you're a big sports fan. I know, Bill, you are as well, in addition to being a fan. I know in baseball, several years ago, we had the steroid scandal. And I know that in professional sports, there were some federal prosecutions, Balco with the steroids and things like that. But in general, is horse racing the only professional sport that has completely failed to self-police itself?
I mean, to look at it in a light, I think what's interesting with HISA, and I think I need to look a little bit more and educate myself on exactly some of the penalties, because I do know that the horses.
Well, but this is the future. I'm talking about up
future. Yeah, no. So I think other sports have probably stepped up a lot quicker, right? Because I think you have a lot more people who voice their opinion. I think in our sport, it was kind of, well, if we can use it, let's use it. And if we can get away with it, because nothing ever falls back. And this was something interesting that I noticed in California, where when I spent just a short stint out there, vets were held accountable. If you had, and my veterinarian, who's a very good vet and a very honest vet, Dr. Jeff Blea, who was kicked off the CHRB because of paperwork issues, that was the stance that California was taking of things had to be in order, things had to be in line. If a vet was found at fault for anything, we can kick you off the racetrack. I have not seen that in any other state. So people penalize trainers, but at the same time, you've got to penalize vets who are actually administering some of this stuff to these horses. Because here's the thing that people don't realize, right? The vets work for the trainers. It's not vice versa, right? It's not the vets, as a trainer, the vet would do whatever I'd ask the vet to do, unless it was so blatantly cruel to the horse that it, but on most things, and I'd seen it happen before, and I was an assistant for a guy who asked the vet to inject ankles on a filly. And there was no problem with the filly's ankles. They were cold, tight. There was no filling. There was no fluid. And the vet says, there's no reason to inject this filly's ankles. And the trainer says, I want to inject him. He says, look, I don't think she needs it. And he tried to argue the fact. The trainer says, look, I just want you to inject him. So he injected him. And that was that. It's legal. You can do it. There was no reason to do it except other than to make the trainer feel good, which then added a $400 vet bill to the owner, that something that didn't need to be done. So there's two sides of it. Vets are unfortunately handcuffed because if a trainer fires them, they lose substantial business. But at the same time, if you've got enough vets that band together and say, we're not going to work for that trainer, that's a way that the sport can police itself a little bit better. So
that would not be the sport policing itself. That would be the vets.
That'd be the vets. But
my question is, are we the only professional sport that up till now has just completely failed to self-police itself? I mean, baseball does it, NFL does it, NBA does it, hockey does it. I mean, we're the only ones that I think completely epically fail at it. Am I wrong?
I think we're more reactive than proactive, and I'll let Bill jump in here, but a lot of it is just not being proactive enough to be out in front to make it safer, just waiting for things to go wrong and fix it. But Bill, go ahead.
Well, I think the other sports don't have as pristine a reputation as you're putting forth. I mean, I think they've acted in their own best interest.
Okay.
And the NBA, certainly when you go way back, they cleaned up fighting on the court when they found out high-paid, talented players were getting gravely injured. I mean, the Rudy Tomjanovich Kermit Washington fight, brought everybody's attention that it may be okay to swing at each other while you're on skates, but when you're super athletes standing on hardwood throwing punches at each other is something that has to be stopped, right? Similarly, when you had the thing that Michael referred to earlier, when NBA players were going into the crowd, they realized that it was in their self-interest to stop that immediately. Baseball saw it, and it's clearly saw it in its self-interest to allow steroids to run rampant. And
Right.
They celebrated the McGuire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds troika. They celebrated that until it became so silly that it was in their best interest to stop it, right?
Right.
Football saw it in its best interest to have it be, brutal and have people suffer concussions when everybody thought that was cool. Once they realized there were lawsuits that it wasn't no longer in their self-interest, they stopped it. Hockey a little less, a little more reluctantly went to helmets because players who came up in the lower leagues and the junior leagues were used to playing with helmets and didn't want to play without it. So they've all acted in their self-interest.
But that's my point. Have we?
No, well, the case can be made that we have acted in our self-interest.
Okay.
What you've heard right now is, too often you hear from people who deal with horses that, the general public just doesn't understand. And the real problem is the general public does understand. Whenever someone tells you don't ask, that's a clear sign that you should ask. And in our instance, we have kind of, as a sport, collectively, we've decided that we kind of like it the way it is. And HESA is stepping on a lot of people's toes, and I'm afraid of federal regulation because the power to regulate is the power to outlaw. It's not inconceivable. You'll see a day where someone will take power in the federal government who won't like horse racing and say, I think we need a 2-year ban, or a 3-year ban to clean it up. But I think up until now, everyone sees it in their own best interest. And until the pressure comes from the outside or from within, I don't know if you'll see change. So,
well, and this is something, Bill, and John and I mentioned it on a different show, and I think it goes to kind of the topic that you mentioned of walking past the people holding signs at the front of the gates at Saratoga, in the animal rights groups. And one day I was walking in with an owner, and that owner said, Michael, or was basically talking to the guys holding the sign saying, you don't know what you're talking about. My horses are taken care of better than you are. They have better living conditions than even you do. And da, 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 da. And he was getting into it with them. And I pulled him aside and I said, look, just don't do the argument, just leave it. And I'm going to tell you something different. Yes, your horses are taken care of incredibly well because they're under my care. And I treat horses in the 1% of what is done at a racetrack. I said, but let's take a tour around Saratoga Racecourse, and I will show you barns where some of these horses are not taken as good of care of. And so I've said it multiple times, horse racing was not going to change. And I actually celebrate some of the stuff that the animal rights groups did because it was the impetus that we needed to actually clean up our sport. Nobody was going to do anything to fix the game until there was that outside pressure of, oh my gosh, we could lose this. And John and I had a show yesterday where we talked about the CBA. It's the same thing. Now they're wanting to make change. Now they're wanting to fix the sales side. They're wanting to breed better horses because there's a shot that the industry might not be here in 10, 15 years. So a lot of it now is because of the outside pressure, which I welcome because it is causing us to clean up the sport and fix the game as a whole. But nothing was happening. And that's, for people who don't know, I left horse racing because it was not going to clean itself up. I tried as a trainer in New York. I saw horses jogging at Aqueduct Racetrack that shouldn't have even been training, that were in some barns. It was very upsetting as a trainer. And I said, look, I cannot support this sport. I cannot support this game, knowing that this goes on at one of the most premier racetracks in the country. And so I took a break. And when, for 5 years, and when you had the rash of breakdowns at Santa Anita, and Santa Anita said, look, we're going to step up and fix the sport and try and make it better, I said, I can support it again, so I'll come back.
Interesting. Getting back to Saratoga, another thing that's happening at this meet that I think is ludicrous. I actually wrote an article about it that went out today. This new Wilson Chute. All right, which is not exactly new. They had it once before, but this whole Wilson Chute thing. Okay,
I like it. It's named after me.
Well, yeah, it is, and you can definitely claim that. Okay, but honestly, I think it's a horrendous idea. I would love to know who came up with it. Okay, it's unfair across the board, and I'll tell you why I think so. Anyway, you run straight down the turn. Okay, it starts past that 1863 club. You run straight down the turn, then you make a sharp left onto the backstretch. Okay, it's a ridiculous disadvantage for the outside horses. So the heck with those trainers, and the heck with those owners, and the heck with those riders that all try hard and point hard and work hard to win a race up at Saratoga. They draw outside. They're pretty much hosed. Okay. The bettors, there's enough intangibles in this game already, enough variables already. Now you got to worry that if you like a horse on the outside there, can you even bet him? Do you want to bet him? I don't. And I've been betting horses a long time. All right. The rail, if you're on the rail, you got to worry that when you're coming up to make that left, you don't get sandwiched by everybody trying to make that sharp left turn. So you're in a kind of bad situation over there. To me, it's result and trip altering and potentially dangerous. And I think it's a completely ridiculous idea. They've been running races at Saratoga since 1863 without a turn and a half mile. Why they need it now, I don't know. Tell me.
I think some of it comes down to, and John, you and I covered this on a previous show, of ability to train horses properly to go a route. And this was a conversation I had with an owner yesterday, because we were asking about a horse that we have going to Saratoga and if the race would fill. And I said, Saratoga is not a problem necessarily if the race will fill. It's if the race will overfill and we get excluded, or does the race overfill enough that it'll split? In the two separate races on the card, I said, luckily, 1 1/8, starter 50, should be popular enough where it will fill. and shouldn't be over popular to where it overfills and we're fourth or fifth on the AE just sitting on the sidelines. Fingers crossed that works out that way. But I think this all ties in, right, with surgeries in young horses and stall bounding them because we're trying to clean them up too early, and then horses that get sold are not necessarily able to withstand training to the point where you can train hard enough on them to go 2 turns, which then goes back to trainers and whether they can train a horse to go 2 turns or not. So you see less and less true 2-turn dirt horses nowadays in the United States. And so as I'm seeing across the country, everything's trending. And what I used to love about New York and what I used to love about Churchill and Kentucky was it was the only places in the country that you really found races for horses to go a distance. California, we'd love to run 5 furlongs if you'd let us. We're
Are you
sick.
telling me that we're running a 1.5 mile because we can't get horses to run a 2-turn mile in an 8?
Yeah, I think that's a big reason why. I think,
Wow.
to be honest, I think a lot of it is if you threw up a 1 1/8 maiden special weight, that race might not fill. I think if you run a 1 1/8 allowance, okay, you might get it to fill. If you're running maiden claimers going a 1 1/8, if you're running claiming races, you're going to have trouble getting those races
So
filled.
run
But
7 furlongs. What's this mile left turn nonsense?
oh no, exactly, and that's the thing. And there's a catch. Here's the difference. And you would know it as a handicapper, right? So the interesting thing with 7/8 is you still have to be a pretty fast horse to go 7/8. You just need a little bit of extra stamina to get the last 1/8, but it's a big difference from 7/8 to a mile, and an even bigger difference a mile to a 1 1/8. So I think by doing this mile, they're catching horses that might not be capable of doing the 1 1/8, but are not fast enough to do the 7/8. And so they're trying to fill a hole potentially by catching at a distance that might get horses to fill more races, is my opinion why they did it.
Well, then I would say to that, before you weigh in, Bill, I would say to that, then build a proper chute that goes straight, okay? It started on Nelson Avenue if you have to. Bill, go ahead.
Well, Michael, I take what you're saying about New York, who used to be a bastion of distance racing, and that was largely the influence of the Phipps family. When the Phipps family, most of their horses were bred to go a distance. They believed going a distance was the proper way to race, and the races were carded accordingly. I think the most glaring part, and I was roundly ridiculed on Twitter for this suggestion, but I think the largest gap they're trying to fill are races at a mile or a 1 1/16 or a 1 1/8 on the grass for older horses that get rained out because they get rained out because the cards are now 9 hours long. It's hard to have a day with no rain in a 9-hour period in Saratoga in August. That get rained off, and horses who could go a mile on the grass, could go a 1 1/16 on the grass, are completely unsuited to go a 1 1/8, particularly on a muddy track.
Right.
And those races are ugly. They're ugly to bet. They're ugly to watch. If you're there in person, you see tired animals struggling through the last 1/8 of a mile with riders not persevering because they're doing the right thing. In my opinion, those races would be better off just being scratched altogether than running them. I mean, there's a handful of them every year, and it's just horses unsuited to do what they're doing is just an unpleasant thing. So I think they're trying to fill a gap. Now, with that, I do remember in 1992, and Jonathan and I spoke about this earlier. I don't remember if they started it exactly where they're starting it now in 1992. The press releases have said it's the original Wilson Chute from 1930. I was there in 1992, and I distinctly remember that it was unfair, that horses on the inside had a huge advantage. Riders acted accordingly by making sure that they got over to the rail at all costs, whether they had early speed or not. And there were some dangerous first 1/8 of a mile. And more so that trainers looked for an excuse to scratch if their horses were out past the 4 post. And I suspect we'll see a little of that now. Now, what I've all said could be completely and totally undercut by the fact that the first race they're going to run on the Wilson Chute is a stakes race that's scheduled for the car. They purposely carted it on the dirt at a mile. So maybe my theory that it was best used or was compelled by the fact that races get rained off the grass, route races get rained off the grass, and they look ugly on the dirt. Maybe I'm completely wrong on that, but that's what I saw the need for a mile race. Because if you take horses that go a mile and 16th on grass and cut them back to 7 furlongs on the dirt, it's a completely different race, and some horses are unsuited for that. And if you make them go a mile and an eighth on the dirt, they're even more unsuited for that. So I thought that was the gap. But we'll see. I mean,
I think it's a terrible idea. I think it's not safe. It's something that I wait all year to bet on Saratoga. Love it. I don't intend on betting any of those one mile races. If I'm going to, I look at betting as investing, and I don't want to invest in that at all. I don't care where they stick them, in what sequence they stick them, and what kind of races they card. I think it's just a bad prospect for me, unless maybe I really like a horse that's drawn inside and has speed enough to clear horses that might be making a left turn into them and put them through the rail. Because the riders, they ride aggressively at Saratoga. They ride more aggressively there than anywhere else in the country year round, in my opinion. And I think they're going to be trying to get that position to make that left turn, and it can create a dangerous or hazardous situation.
Jonathan, one of the things, and of course you've made your name in the horizontal bets, and you've made a tremendous living at the horizontal bets. But I think this is another effect of the popularity and dependence that the racetracks have now on the horizontal bets. It's always a difficult call whether or not to take a race off the grass, because the weather conditions in Saratoga are so unpredictable in August. And again, as I said, the racing day is so long that it's hard to have and I think there's always a desire to make a decision before the betting starts on the later horizontal races. Right. And I fear a little bit that the availability of this mile chute will make it more likely that races will come off the grass, because it's not seen as such a devastating change as it has been in other years.
Well, that's wrong. That's wrong. When they take change surfaces, it's devastating to the better, regardless of what kind of chute you're going to run the other race out of. Now, another interesting thing I found. Second race on opening day is a maiden special weight race for 2-year-olds. I think the purse is $105,000. That's not a bad purse for 2-year-olds. 6 horses. Of the 6, 1 homebred. Godolphin's got a homebred in there. So you got 5 auction buys out of a 6-horse field. I remember when those maiden special weight races at Saratoga were made up of horses that were literally priceless. No amount of money could buy them, because they were primarily homebreds that were raced with pride by the breeders, who, if you approach them to buy a piece or a mane or a tail or a hoof or a leg, they would laugh at you no matter how big of a check you brought to the table, because, like I said, they were priceless. I thought that only 6 on opening day in a 2-year-old maiden special weight race, a meet that everybody points these 2-year-olds for, 6 horses, could be a potentially dangerous sign for a meet that I think is already dragged out and elongated to the point where a lot of the cards that you see at Saratoga during the week, you can run at Aqueduct on a Wednesday in February. Thoughts on that, Bill, as a Saratoga historian? Is that 6-horse field opening day a little bit of a concern going forward as to what we might see?
I think first of all, opening day in July 14th is not opening day August 1st. So I mean that's a big consequence of what you're speaking about there. As a 40-day meet is harder to fill than a 24-day meet.
I agree.
So that's, I mean, that's just math. I think those horses that you're talking about, that we all love to see, the homebreds who are royally bred, who show off, you'll see them the few days before the sales, August 7th and 8th. And I think the fact that racing has decided to go to Saratoga in middle of July hasn't changed those breeders' desire to show off those horses the day before.
The few that are left, there's not many of them left.
Well, I mean, you'll see some really well-bred horses run when those owners are in town. And again, it's for the owners to see them because they're in town, but it's also to hype the breeding stock that they're selling in the evenings. So I mean, that's really always what that was about. I wouldn't put too much emphasis on not filling a card right well on July 14th, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting with, I think what we're seeing more and more throughout the industry, and we're seeing it in stakes races as well. We're seeing less top quality horses and more middle quality horses. And what I mean by that is, it's just kind of what I see. You'll see less maiden special weight horses. You'll see, and there's no really other options at Saratoga. You're either running in a maiden auction race, maiden special weight, maiden New York bred race, or a stake. I mean, those are your options. You can't dodge by going maiden claiming. I think potentially the purse level at Woodbine, because I do know owners that previously raced in New York who looked at the bigger purse at Woodbine and said easier competition, bigger money, let's run at Woodbine. But what I can't understand, and this goes back to some of the stats that I think we keep on horses, and trainers. The high win percentage that you have to keep as a trainer in order to attract owners gets people to shy away from running at the big meet, because everybody knows when you go to Saratoga that you have to have a better horse than what the race actually is. And I used to tell my clients that when we'd go up and run in Saratoga, look, if the horse is a non-winners of 240, we're going to run it for 25, which is why it's such a great meet to claim horses out of. But I don't understand why people keep shying away from running horses in these graded stakes races that have 5 horses, or maiden special weights that have 6. A check is a check if you're good enough for those spots. And it's something that we're seeing across the board through our sport on the upper echelon. What was interesting, and this was something I used to find in New York was, and you find it everywhere, you have trainers who have a certain thought process of what a race is going to be. And so let's say late June maiden special weight 3-year-old and up at Belmont, okay? Easier than the maiden 50, because everybody thinks you could hook a monster in the maiden special weight, so they all jump in the maiden 50. And the maiden 50 is full of 5 decent horses. The maiden special weight has 1 good one, and everybody else is just kind of there. So sometimes there's a fear mentality amongst trainers where they try and hopefully dodge a good horse, and they end up in a tougher race by dodging it. So for me, I think maybe some of this short maiden special weight field, John, with 2-year-olds, because I'm looking at the trainers in the race. It's not all Todd Pletcher. It's not all Bill Mott. I mean, you got Danny Gargan in there. You've got good New York trainers, but it's not chock block full of high dollar, high class 2-year-olds. So it could be a situation of just dispersion of horses going to Woodbine in different places.
All right. I'm going to throw some questions out at you guys. Predictions. All right. Who wins the jockey title? We got Flavien Prat coming in. First Saratoga meet. Luis Saez won it last year, I think. Irad just beat out Dylan Davis, who had a huge meet. Dylan Davis at Belmont. Irad said, nope, you're not getting the title, and won a couple of races those last 2 days to take him. Who wins the meet, Bill?
Well, it's a difficult question, right? I mean, you've listed the usual contenders. But again, that's always skewed a little bit by the really top riders taking days off to ride elsewhere. I guess there's no Arlington Million this year, so you won't lose a day there. I guess you have to count on Chad Brown winning a ton of races, I would assume, and I don't know. I mean, I tend to like Jose Ortiz. I think he's probably the one who probably will will surprise most people, but any of those riders are capable of winning this title.
So you think Chad will win the training title? You think he'll have enough?
I don't know if winning the title is, you know what the variables are on that, but that history as a guide, that's that's a good contender there. That's for sure.
I agree. I mean, he destroyed him at Belmont. Any thoughts on that, Michael? Who's going to be the leading rider?
I think a lot of it, potentially comes down to what trainers are about to come up with significant horses at the meets. And we talked about 2-year-olds and being at the yearling sales last year. I know that Brad Cox bought a substantial amount of nice horses. So I think looking at that and knowing a couple different things, obviously he rides everybody. I know Chad and Flavian are become very close. And Chad obviously won the Preakness. There's a lot of grass races at Saratoga as well. I'd almost hedge my bets towards Luis Saez.
I think Saez is going to win it. My question is really what I wanted to ask, but I didn't want to put anybody, put poor Flavian on the spot. You think Pratt can win it, his first Saratoga meet?
No, I mean, I think Flavian's a phenomenal rider. I think he's a great rider overall. He's very good. Saratoga takes a whole, I remember going up as a trainer, and luckily my first year training was my first year of having horses. I didn't have anything ready to run. So I was able to watch and learn, and then also perfect for the next year. So when we finally ran something, I knew what we had to run. But I think it's so competitive, and the timing of each race is, and you win by such small margins unless you're on the dirt, that you've got to understand that. I remember, I think it was my third year training in Saratoga. The second year I ran 4 horses, won 2 races in the third. The third year I took up 24 horses, and I was one of the leading trainers for In the Money with 0 wins. But with that being said, it was because I had a horse run 5th, beaten only a neck from 1st to 5th. So I think understanding that timing is going to throw Pratt off a little bit, because those margins on the grass are tiny. You get horses getting beat by just nose head. So I think it takes some experience to really find yourself at that peak.
Hang on, I'll be back. I'll share something here. I am, just so you know, tied for the leading win percentage owner in the history of Saratoga.
Okay.
That's a fact. Can you see it?
Not really.
No, you got your screen's blocking it.
My screen's blocking. Okay, it's a win picture. I'm a halo. You can't see it. Trust me. You'll have to take my word for it. Trust us.
Written by Johnny V. Written by Johnny V.
Trust us. Johnny V wrote it.
Yeah.
I am
Johnny,
leading one horse I ran in Saratoga in my entire career as an owner. I'm a halo. One horse, and she won. So I'm 1 for 1.
Nice.
And I'm 100%. That's highest winning percentage you could have. So I'm at the top of the list. I'm 1 for 1. I'm never running another horse there unless I know I'm going to win for sure. So barring a walkover, I'm out.
Well, Jonathan, I'm not 100%, and in my short race owning career in Saratoga, I won 2 races in 4 days with the same horse.
That's pretty impressive.
I won on a Friday and on a Monday with a horse.
I remember that.
Greyjoy,
I remember that.
By Carlos
Yeah.
Martin. Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah, that's pretty special.
And Michael, there was a point there where the only 2-time winners over Saratoga that meet were my horse Greyjoy and Songbird.
Oh, wow.
Not bad. Good. You were in good company.
Yeah.
You were in good company. So, well, gentlemen, I think we covered what we wanted to cover. I think, all in all, should be a fun meet. Saratoga always is. There'll be some unexpected results for sure. They don't call that place the graveyard of favorites and champions for nothing. There'll be some nice upsets. There'll be some great racing. hopefully we're on the right end of a couple of those. Just
But
takes.
Jonathan, let me mention something which I just thought of here. You know, you'd asked me
Please
earlier
do.
who I write for, and I write for Saratoga Today, but I wrote an article for a magazine called Equicurian Magazine, which is kind of a play on words there. It's a horse racing magazine up in Saratoga. But I wrote it about the Martin family, Frank Martin, Jose Martin, Carlos Martin.
Okay,
And they've been training in Saratoga for over 70 straight years.
unbelievable.
And almost 50 years out of the same barn. So I think that's an interesting thing that maybe your readers might want to take a look at some point. I mean, it's a nice family.
Send me a link to it and I'll definitely put it up on this show for sure. I wrote an article about Frank Martin several months ago and the remarkable career that he's had. Why there was no race named for him at NYRA, I do not understand. I think if there was ever a trainer that should have a race named for them at NYRA, it's Frank Martin. And yeah, really a tremendous history and a tremendous impact on the game the Martin family has had. And I don't think they get the recognition for the contribution that the family has made to New York racing, especially, but racing in general. Really a remarkable racing family and still going with cars.
And I agree. And one of the things that I did in my research on this is that Jose Martin, you know, Frank's son and
I know
Carlos's father, has to be among the greatest trainers not in the Hall of Fame. You know, I list the year he had where he won almost every possible stakes race, you know, with were
Noble
not
Nashua, Wayward Lass.
correct.
Right. I mean,
And none of them were expensive or flashy bred.
Right.
And he made champions out of them, and he turned Groovy's career around. You know, Groovy
unbelievable. Right.
ran last in the Derby, and he made him a sprint champion by taking a strong line with the owners and redirecting that horse to being a sprint. And at some point, I think I have to look at the nominating process for the Hall of Fame to see what's required to put forth his name as in nomination, because his numbers certainly seem to warrant it to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I vote for the Hall of Fame. I'm a voter for the Hall of Fame, and I'm surprised his name's not there, to tell you the truth. I really am. He's he's in my opinion quite deserving. But the family, even Gloria, is now involved in breeding. I mean, they've just made a tremendous contribution and impact on racing and Saratoga and just New York racing in general. So I agree, and I'd love to read that article for sure. So we'll put a link.
I'll get you a link.
At the bottom of this. I think people would like it as well. Frank Martin was an interesting character. Jose as well, but Frank was special when it came to racetrack characters and racetrack stories for sure. Well, gentlemen, I think that's a wrap. What do you guys think? Anything else we want to say about Saratoga?
Just looking forward to getting there.
Yeah, you're looking forward to getting there.
Yeah, I just want to say I certainly didn't mean this to come off negative on any of these things. This is we talk about.
It is what it is. I didn't really mean it to come off negative. I mean, I'm not happy about that Chute. I think it's ridiculous. I'm not happy about Vazquez. But listen, I wrote in the article, that I wrote today. No matter how much you modernize Saratoga, no matter how much you commercialize it, no matter how much you change it, no matter how much you stretch out that meat, water down the racing, it's still a very, very special place to horse people. And that ambiance, that vibe, that feeling that you get when you cross that Mohawk River Bridge and start getting close to the town, just will always be there. I mean, you can't kill that. It's a special place.
Absolutely. And I mean, we talk about these things because we care. Jonathan, you and I know, and Michael, I don't know, you may be too young. There was a time when no one talked about racing, and that wasn't a good time.
We're back in that time. We're just we just talk about it on Twitter now, but nobody else does. But no, I get you. I mean, and it's it's a great sport. It's a wonderful sport all around. And, it's our job and our duty. And that's why, John, we're doing shows like this, is to get more people interested in the great sport that it is. And, the reason why this show's called Unfiltered is, we want to put out ideas there to help fix it, to make it better, so it continues to go on an upward trajectory and hopefully pull in a whole new audience.
Is that why we do it? I do it just to call it the way I see it. So
No, I do it. I do it.
that's why I do it. But
You just need a place to vent. That's why.
yeah, I just call it the way I see it. Let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
But I first started going to Saratoga in the early 1960s. That's a long time ago, and I remember it. I remember, Bill, you probably remember this. Do you remember when they used to take the photos with the handheld camera, and they had that cord where they used to, that little rolling thing, and they used to send it down to the stewards?
Yes.
Oh, and then, you could actually see it going across the crowd. You could actually have grabbed it and taken it if you wanted. And that's where they would get the photo and open it up, man. I mean, just.
They used to saddle the horses in what's now the parking lot,
That's correct. Right. And you used to be able to walk right up to the trees, where they would walk the horses around the trees and go. I stood 2 inches from champions, and I always thought it was very dangerous. I'm like, it's amazing nobody ever gets kicked or no horse ever got loose, because there was just the tree in the middle and then like a dirt path around it, and they'd walk, and you could walk right up to that dirt path and stand as close as you wanted. Every now and then, if a horse was acting up, you might have a Pinkerton there, just one, just telling people, stand back a little bit. But it was, and then when they would walk the horses into the actual paddock, they would walk them right through the crowd, because the crowd was walking past, walking from those individual trees where they might have watched the horse that they wanted, being saddled. Now they're walking back towards the grandstand or the clubhouse, and the horses are walking into the paddock right amongst the crowd. There were no ropes, no barriers, nothing. It was all, just all free and out in the open. It was really a magical place. It really was.
I guess one of the things that's going to be obsolete, and probably is already obsolete, but the big shoe board that used to list all the shoes. Most of those shoes, I think, are now outlawed by HISA. But, but the shoe board was a puzzle all its own. Learning how to read what those lights meant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Last take. This new bar over the walking ring that everybody's talking about, that some trainers are saying they don't even want to school horses in the paddock because it's too obtrusive, and people are worried that you're going to have drunks leaning over the rails, spooking a 2-year-old and spooking the horses, which is probably going to happen late in the day. What's your take on this new paddock, and this new bar, rooftop, whatever they call it, this new bar that they built right overlooking the paddock in very, very close proximity? I've seen pictures of it. It's a little close. What do you think?
I'll leave to Michael whether or not it'll spook the horses. I don't know if it's as imposing as to cause that, but Michael, you'll know better. I haven't thought about it, but
have you seen it, Michael?
Yeah, no, I've seen photos and looked at it and kind of watched people put up videos of it. Personally, if you're a good enough trainer, you can train a horse to get used to anything. The only thing,
train a horse to get used to drunk people that lost money yelling at it.
Yeah, no, hell,
okay, you're gonna get that. You're gonna probably get that.
I dealt with that at Belmont with the Jamaican guys screaming at you through the tunnel, or aqueduct. It's look, the one thing that would be the biggest issue is later in the day when they're drunk, accidentally knocking programs off from that second level, and that hitting the horse path in front of horses. Because that's just obviously an object that just fell out of the blue, and nobody would have anticipated that, neither a horse. But typically the most dangerous thing at Saratoga.
What about a drink with ice in it?
A drink too, but it's not gonna affect them as much as something like a paper program, or But the thing that used to be the most nerve-wracking experience in Saratoga was being caught in the paddock at 8 a.m. when they'd open the damn gates. The guys running in with their coolers to get the picnic table, and then flapping their tarps to try and get their table. I had that multiple times with 2-year-olds in the paddock. And I'd literally have to, ride my pony over him and say, look, can you wait till the horse leaves the paddock to flap this tarp thing that you want to put over? So, I mean, there's no tarps on that thing. So hopefully they don't decide to say, hey, let's put a flag or let's hang something from this thing. As long as there's nothing like that, the only worry you have is people dropping programs and stuff from the second floor.
Do you remember the days, Michael, you probably are not familiar with this practice. Bill, you will be. Do you remember the days that you used to get to the racetrack early and you would be able to take a piece of paper, put it down on one of the benches or one of the seats, and then nobody would sit there because they would know that that was somebody's seat, and it was pretty much your seat for the entire day?
Not only do I remember the way you used to fold the unused page of the larger daily racing form
Absolutely.
to fit it snugly and neatly to make it clear that it was your seat.
Absolutely. You want to laugh? You know what my mom used to do? I used to go back then with my mom and my aunt. Okay. My dad used to go to work behind the windows. Okay. My mom and my aunt would go, or my mom and her girlfriend, Josie, would go. And, before they started getting reserved seats, they would just take a seat on a bench and put the paper down. And my mom had a trick. Okay. She was always thinking. She would take like a magic marker or a felt tip pen, and she would write the name on the things to make sure people knew it was her seat. But she wouldn't write her name. She'd write like Rocco, Puff Pony, name like that. You know what I mean? So this way, anyone would come look, they would never, no one ever took her seat. It worked. Always had her seat,
Well, I don't lament the loss of a tent that was hot and leaky and at times disgusting. But I do hope that it's not. I think the last thing any racetrack needs is another exclusive area. In our lifetime, we've gone from it being a game where attending the races, you rubbed shoulders and elbows with kings and paupers, to where now everybody's segregated based on wealth. And I don't think that serves either the richer people or the poorer people well. I think so. So anything, whenever I hear of an exclusive area at a racetrack, to me, it smacks as a step backwards from what made the. I mean, I've been to Yankee Stadium. They have plenty of exclusive areas. Still the most fun place to be is among fans. And the more the racetrack becomes an exclusive area, the less communality you have, and the less fun it is to me. So that's. I hope it doesn't devolve into a empty spot that's expensive.
One of my early memories of Saratoga is when I used to go as a kid and I'd be running around the whole place. I was 10 years old, 9 years old, 11 years old. My mom was sitting, my dad was working, and I would run around the place like I owned it. And back then, Fred Astaire used to go to the races every day. Okay, and you would see him walking all around, and I think he was either married to or courting Robin Smith at the time. He was a jockey. She wound up marrying him, I believe. But I knew he was Fred Astaire, and I kind of knew he was. I was a kid, but I never at the time realized as a kid what a fascinating guy he was. And he was accessible and used to talk to everybody and was always hanging around in front of the jockey's room in that little area where the jockeys would come out and head for those trees that we were talking about, or head for the paddock. And he was always over there talking and I just wish I was a little older and I would have been able to, talk with him a little bit, because he was always there and always around. And, it was, definitely accessible. So that I agree. That was part of Saratoga, Yeah.
Every time you lose a little bit of that, you lose a little bit of the charm. But we'll see. Maybe it'll be an improvement over the tent. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Always a pleasure talking horses. Always a pleasure talking with you two guys, and always a pleasure talking about Saratoga. So that's it.
Thanks so much for having me.
No, always a pleasure. So ciao for now.
Thank you.
For the best.
Vacoma broke well on the outside,
But you don't expect to get speed like this.
Inside, Vacoma continues to battle on down the rail. It is Vacoma who's going to win the Met Mile.
Been there, done that.
Nobody does it better.